think I'm a little bit far away from the audience. I think I need to go a little bit forward. But that's no problem. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, you try and do it so it's not in front of the deities, but it needs to be a little bit forward. But it's all right. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatsira Panachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatsira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatsira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaunitai ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani ki jai, Kishore Kishori ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning we're continuing with Canto 10, Chapter 57, and there are three texts for today. Text 10, 11, and 12. And text 10 is on the board, so we'll chant responsibly. Agatya Bhagavans Tasmat Saparya Sagraja Puram Satadan Vanam Arebe Hantum Hartum Manim Tata Agatya Bhagavans Tasmat Saparya Sagraja Puram Satadan Vanarebe Hantum Hartum Manim Tata Agatya Bhagavans Tasmat Saparya Sagraja Puram Satadan Vanam Arebe Hantum Hartum Manim Tata Agatya Bhagavans Tasmat Saparya Sagraja Puram Satadan Vanam Arebe Hantum Hartum Manim Tata. Please chant. Agatya Bhagavans Tasmat Saparya Sagraja Puram Satadan Vanam Arebe Hantum Hartum Manim Tata. Agatya Bhagavans Tasmat Saparya Sagraja Puram Satadan Vanam Arebe Hantum Hartum Manim Tata. Agatya Bhagavans Tasmat Saparya Sagraja Puram Satadan Vanam Arebe Hantum Hartum Manim Tata. The alliteration in this verse is very nice, especially the last line. So the word for word, Agatya, returning. Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Tasmat, from that place. Saparya, with his wife, Saagraja, and with his elder brother, Puram, to his capital, Satadanvanam, Satadanva. Arebe, he prepared, Hantum, to kill, Hartum, to take, Manim, the jewel, Tata, from him. And text, the translation for text 10 is as follows. The Supreme Lord returned to his capital with his wife and elder brother. After arriving in Dwarka, he readied himself to kill Satadanva and retrieve the jewel from him. In text 11. Sopi Kitodyaman Hatva Vita Prana Prapipsaya Sahayaye Kritavarmanam Ayachata Sakapravit. And the translation for text 11. Upon learning that Lord Krishna was preparing to kill him, Satadanva was struck with fear. To save his life, he approached Kritavarma and begged him for help, but Kritavarma replied as follows. Text 12. Naham Ishvaraya Kuryam Helanam Rama Krishnaya Kanushe Maya Kalpeta Tayo Vrijinam Acharan Kamsa Sahanugo Pito Yadivesha Tayu Yutahasniyam Triyam Jarasanda Saptadase Samyugat Virato Galaham. And the translation. Kritavarma said, I dare not offend the Supreme Lords, Krishna and Balaram. Indeed, how can one who troubles them expect any good fortune? Kamsa and all his followers lost both their wealth and their lives because of enmity towards them. And after battling them 17 times, Jarasandha was left without even a chariot. And there's a one-line BBT purport. Srila Sridhar Swami explains that the word Helanam indicates acting against the Lord's will, and that Virjanam indicates an offense against the Lord's. Om Jnanatimidandasya Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sacha Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitam Cha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Ishvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpa Tarubhyas Cha Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimata Romapada Swami Iti Namine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimata Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. So the beginning of these three texts or four texts is that the Supreme Lord returned to his capital with his wife and elder brother. So that's Satyabhama. That's a particular wife. So that was text 10. So there was a previous narration, and that's of Satyabhama, this particular wife of Krishna, going to Hastinapur. And this was how it was explained, her journey to Hastinapur. To sorrowfully tell Lord Krishna, who was already aware of the situation, about her father's murder. So that is text 8. Now, Satyajit, her father, or King Satyajit, had been murdered in his sleep by Satyadanva. And Satyadanva had performed this particular act out of greed for one possession that King Satyajit had, and that was the Shamantaka jewel. So Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he reveals that Satyabhama had traveled to Hastinapur for a particular reason, and it's very interesting. So it was not exactly that she merely had to inform Krishna about her father's murder, but rather people had told her that since her husband was the Supreme Lord, he had the capacity to be able to bring her father back to life. So she had a little motivation in addition for traveling to Hastinapur to Lord Krishna. And in this text that we're reading, there's a connection to that particular motivation that she had for traveling to Hastinapur, because Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains, and these are his words, when Satyabhama returned to Dwarka, she told her relatives and also Krishna, she told her relatives in particular that Krishna and Balaram had tearfully lamented, "We cannot bring Satyajit back to life." So she was informing her relatives that was the conclusion after her trip to Hastinapur, that that possibility that might be there, that Krishna may be able to perform this extraordinary act of actually reviving her father. She had to inform everyone that actually they themselves had said, "We cannot bring Satyajit back to life." Now, Srila Prabhupada writes in the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna book, then Krishna and Balaram, along with Satyabhama, immediately returned to Dwarka and began to make plans to kill Satyadanva and take away the jewel. So the drama continues. So from writing on this verse, Srila Sanatana Goswami points out that Krishna makes plans. So he gathered his friends, Krishna gathered his friends in order that they help him. Since Kritavarma was assisting Satyadanva. So Krishna knew precisely the whole arrangement that had happened there, that Kritavarma and Akura had incited Satyadanva to perform the murder. So there's that description, they all return. So even though we're reading that all three of them return, it's actually specifically Krishna who's making the plans and gathering his friends. And why he's doing that is he knows that Satyadanva has the, friendship with Kritavarma and Akura. And Srila Sanatana Goswami, this is from a compilation of some of the writings of the Acharyas, a particular book dedicated to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Srila Sanatana Goswami states that Krishna actually announced his efforts. So he publicly let everyone know that he was going to pursue and kill Satyadanva. And he even specified that it's going to take place in a solitary place. And he even announced he's going to actually show favor to Akura. So this is all, public. So that's why we can read that Satadhanva gets struck with fear, because it's a public announcement that Krishna makes. And although he did this with Balaram, only Krishna is mentioned because he is the main person making the arrangements to kill Satadhanva. So, and we read this in this text, it says, he readied himself to kill Satadhanva and retrieve the jewel from him. So this was the reading, gathering his friends, the public announcement, and of course the emotional impact on Satadhanva. And the reason Krishna made these plans is that his purpose of appearing in this world was to kill demons. And Krishna explains this himself. Whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice, a descendant of Bharata, and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. That's from Bhagavad Gita 4:7. Yada yada hi dharmasya glani bhavati bharata abhyatmanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijami aham. So it's a particularly interesting thing, because the religious principles that are being mentioned are actually laws that Krishna himself has made, Krishna being the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and only he can manufacture a system of religion. And the highest, of course, of such religious principles being that one should surrender to him and nothing more, as Srila Prabhupada puts it, nothing more. So his mission is to lead people to God consciousness and obedience to the principles of religion, putting it very broadly. It's particularly interesting touching on this, because obviously this breaking of religious principles, it becomes very visible when it's actually taking place with the leaders of society. So very many of these pastimes of Lord Krishna, he's annihilating the heads of society. So there's a whole slew of demoniac kings, and who obviously do not have this thought that religious principles should lead to surrender to Lord Krishna. In fact, they're directly opposed to him. So the position of Satadhanva, who's also a king, which is interesting because one could almost overlook that fact, is written by Srila Prabhupada. This is him writing again in Krishna book. He says, although he was a great outlaw in the city, Satadhanva was still very much afraid of Krishna's power, and thus when Krishna arrived, he became most afraid. Understanding Krishna's plan to kill him, he immediately went to take shelter of Kritavarma. So naturally, using this word that a king has become an outlaw in his own city is quite something. I grew up when I was very small. My mother had a great fondness for American Western movies. So when I was very small, I'd be taken to a movie house, and it was always about somebody became an outlaw, and then there was a pursuit of an outlaw person. So now, in this particular case, we're actually hearing it's not just a case of a regular person who's committed some crime, and there's the law behind him to bring him to justice. It's actually Satadhanva in a royal position who's actually become an outlaw. So in keeping with this point of following of religious principles, or not doing so in the case of Satadhanva, because clearly to take the life of another king while the king is asleep is clearly not in line with religious principles. There's the point that Satadhanva was wanting to save his life. So you could put it this way: he didn't want to sustain any injuries to his body. You could put it that way. Um, like in the old Western movies, there would always be a shootout. So, each person would have their gun in their holster, and somebody would bring out the gun, and whoever was fastest would shoot the opponent, and that's how the whole thing got resolved. And in this particular case, the anxiety of Satadanva in being an outlaw was wanting to, save his physical body. So this is opposed to thinking, how could he save his reputation? Or it's opposed to thinking, how could he function according to religious principles, even though he committed this terrible act? He was not thinking that. Not thinking about saving reputation or following religious principles at all, merely saving his body. So, and this particular point came from Srila Jiva Goswami. So if one pauses and considers what it means to follow religious principles, it can be noted that great kings were very responsible in that they took instructions given by saintly personalities. So they accepted the authority of saintly persons, and then they would execute their monarchical power. And this takes place even in the present time. I mean, it's not the Vedic system, but there's a particular king in British monarchy. I mean, I grew up in a country that was under British rule, so at least for some time. So I'm sort of very conscious of British monarchy. So there was a person who came to power, or it was his turn to follow the lineage of in monarchical rule, King Edward VIII. And there's a mention that he gave this particular speech, and this is what he said. As Prince of Wales, I bore a device with an ancient motto. And then he says what the motto is: I serve. As king, I shall hold this in constant remembrance, for a king can perform no higher function than that of service. So, to have this kind of mood and attitude naturally requires a lot of taking of advice. And in the Vedic system for monarchy, at least the advice is coming from Brahmanas. In non-Vedic systems of monarchy, there's still deference to religious principles at all time, because there's a close connection between the church and the state. So I forget what the particular, I think it's Protestants, perhaps in England, I don't know. There was an abdication which happened with King Edward VIII. Just thinking of something historical that's non-Vedic, but still in just reference to this role that the monarchy plays. And the mention is made that he abdicated, and this abdication resembled American Watergate affair, because the occupants of the highest office in their respective societies each went down for defects of character. Each had breached a great trust. So the condition was that he should publicly, this is the condition that the king, under which the king has, or the condition the king has to meet, he should publicly represent certain standards which his subjects expect him to follow. And so, of course, in the case of King Edward VIII, at that time, divorce was not looked upon very kindly, and his particular desire had been to marry a divorced woman. So he was not publicly representing a certain standard, and the standard was that he should be marrying a person who was going to be married for the first time to him, but he wanted to marry a divorced woman, and so his subjects were not happy with that. And Srila Prabhupada comments on this. In the present age of Kali, the head of government does not follow the instructions given by saintly persons. Therefore, neither the citizens nor the men of government are very happy. Their duration of life is shortened, and almost everyone is wretched and bereft of bodily strength and spiritual power. So this kind of close adherence on the part of the monarchy to advice coming from religious personalities. And when one reads about King Edward VIII, indeed he had that kind of close interaction with somebody who headed the church in England. And again, that whether things are followed exactly or not is very important. And Srila Prabhupada comments, in this particular age, it's not actually taking place, that close following advice that's coming from the religious section of society, the Brahmanas. And it has an impact on everyone. Just because the head, the monarch, is not actually following, it means that actually everybody's life becomes wretched. And the way it manifests is that bodily strength is absent and spiritual strength is absent. So this is from a purport in Srimad Bhagavatam 4.14, where Srila Prabhupada comments on that. Now here Satadanva is a person in the royal order, and he is said to have a life which is almost gone. And this is how it's put. Wicked Satadanva murdered Satyajit in his sleep simply out of greed. In this way, the sinful Satadanva shortened his own lifespan, because that's a reaction. If one is actually taking the life of someone else, then one's own life is shortened. So, of course, if justice is brought right away, generally there's execution of a murderer. So in this case, Krishna is going to take matters into his own hands, and indeed the life of Satadanva is shortened. So that we read in the 5th verse of this chapter. Now, Srila Prabhupada, continuing in Krishna book, he writes, Kritavarma. So here is Satadanva. He's approached King Kritavarma to ask him some thoughts, and or at least his assistance. And Kritavarma responds to King Satadanva, in this kind of way. I shall never be able to offend Lord Krishna and Balaram, for they are not ordinary persons. They are the supreme personality of Godhead. Who can be saved from death if he has offended Balaram and Krishna? No one can be saved from their wrath. So that's a response Satadanva gets from Kritavarma. And it's pointed out in the BBT purport, just the one-line purport that I read for text 12 and 13, or 12 and 13, that the offense to the Lord may be acting against his will, and the word that was used, because this is taken from one of the old commentators, Srila Swami, the word that's used is helanam. And the second offense that can be made against the Lord is directly offending him. That's vijanam. So this offense of acting against the Lord's will was done by Satyajit. So the person who got murdered. So this was a description of that offense that King Satyajit, now dead, at the hands of Satadanva. This is the description of the offense he committed against King Krishna. Against Krishna. Well, it was King Krishna at that time. On one occasion, Lord Krishna requested Satyajit to give the jewel to the Yadu king Ugrasena, but Satyajit was so greedy that he refused. He gave no thought to the seriousness of the offense he committed by denying the Lord's request. So that was much earlier on in the 35th chapter. So it's interesting. It never even occurred to him to reflect on his response to Lord Krishna. It didn't even occur to him. And by not offering the jewel to Krishna, but enjoying it himself instead, and this is Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, that object which had the power to remove all misfortune would instead become the cause of all misfortune. So it got reversed just by virtue of the fact that King Satyajit offended Lord Krishna. And it was going against Lord Krishna's will, so coming into direct opposition to Lord Krishna's will. So not actually surrendering that jewel and putting it into the coffers of King Ugrasena, the superior king, and therefore allowing many other citizens, or a bigger amount of citizens, to benefit from the remarkable wealth and good health coming from this Shamataka jewel. He wished to keep it for himself. So now, an offense directly against the Lord is a different kind, and there's one example, and it's seen from much earlier on in Krishna's pastimes. It was Brahmanas who neglected Krishna. Krishna and Balaram had sent the cowherd boys to go and ask for some food stuff, and the Brahmanas just ignored them, completely ignored them. So they neglected Krishna and Balaram. And so then Krishna subsequently told the cowherd boys to please approach their wives. The wives, of course, responded very favorably. So this was an offense, again, directly against the Lord, because they were neglecting Krishna. But the interesting thing with the Brahmanas is they came to reflect on the sin they'd committed. And in fact, by the time they had gone through their reflection of what they'd done, they actually became very eager to see Krishna. But of course, they weren't very advanced in their Krishna consciousness. And in order to go and see Krishna, they would have had to travel to Vraja, and they were fearful that Kamsa might kill them. So they didn't go that far, but at least they had gone through the reflection of the acts that they had performed, merely that one of neglecting Krishna and Balaram, refusing to give them food stuff. So Lord Krishna and Balaram, this is a little description of that pastime, just so you get some sense of that offense. So it's not going against the will of Krishna, but it's just an offense against Krishna. They had requested in a very straightforward manner food from the Brahmanas, but the Brahmanas failed to give it. And this is the description. This is from 10th canto, 23rd chapter. When the Brahmanas came to their senses and began to feel great remorse, they thought, "We have sinned, for we have denied the request of the two lords of the universe, who deceptively appeared as ordinary human beings." So they recognized their error. Now, and of course, that's in contrast to Satadanva, who didn't even give a thought to it. And he was committing an even greater offense. He was directly opposing Krishna's will. So Kritavarma here addresses Satadanva by acknowledging his own role in Satadanva's action, because there was a role he played in the murder too. And this is Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur putting into words the particular communication that Kritavarma, or the exchange he had with Satadanva. "Indeed, I instigated you to murder Satyajit, but not out of enmity towards Krishna. However, if you do not want to surrender to Krishna, why should I follow you and also go against the Lord?" So you can see the implication here of the mentality of Kritavarma. He's making that distinction of the motive behind his assistance of Satadanva in a sinful act. it wasn't actually based on wanting to oppose Krishna or out of ill feeling towards Krishna. And he's taken it even further because he understands religious principles. He says, why should I also go against, follow you and go against the Lord? Because he understands religious principles, so he's not going to carry it any further. So he's refusing to go one step further. He acknowledges his initial part, but that's as far as it goes. He acknowledges his motivation is not the same as Satadhanva. And Satadhanva is described as being evil-minded and a firm hater of Satyajit. That's the actual description of him. So he's carrying a lot of ill feeling, actually hating King Satyajit and actually just being generally evil-minded. So this admission on the part of Kritavarma is explained by Srila Vishwanath that both he and Akrura were furious with Satyajit for having insulted Krishna and for having spread false rumors against him. Because that was one of the things King Satyajit did. When his brother, this was the whole series of events that played themselves out with now all the positive benefits of the jewel getting reversed. When Satyajit's brother Prasenna placed the jewel on his neck and went hunting, he actually got killed by a lion. So, of course, this was not known. But what Satyajit did was he started spreading the rumor, Krishna probably killed my brother and took the jewel. So that was what Akrura and Kritavarma were furious about, because they saw it as such an insult against Krishna, spreading these false rumors. And it was for this reason that they instigated Satadhanva to kill Satyajit. And they had in fact confused the mind of Satadhanva, because they told him, these were the words they told Satadhanva. So imagine somebody who's already evil-minded, who's already hating King Satyajit, and this is what he's hearing. This is what he hears. Satyajit promised his jewel-like daughter to us, but then gave her to Krishna instead, contemptuously neglecting us. So why should Satyajit not follow his brother's path? So it's by suggestion. They're not directly saying kill Satyajit, but considering that the path his brother followed was one leading to death, they're saying, why should he also not die? Because after all, he actually was Krishna acted very contemptuously towards us. He neglected us. He didn't give, Satyajit acted contemptuously towards us. He didn't give us his daughter that he promised us, so he broke his promise. So they're saying, by virtue of the fact that Satyajit had broken his promise, therefore he should be killed. So, one can question that logic, but you say that to somebody who's evil-minded and who's already hating Satyajit, he performed the killing act. So what Kritavarma and Akrura were responsible for was confusing the mind of Satadhanva. And he adds, so this is continuing Kritavarma's response to Satadhanva when he's appealing to him for some assistance. Kritavarma says, Kamsa and his followers died and thus lost their wealth. So you can see he's making a connection. Again, he knows the mentality of Satadhanva, just like he knew earlier on the mentality of Satadhanva. It was easy to incite him to perform the murder. Now he knows that he's really concerned about the jewel. So he's again tapping into the mentality, because he says Kamsa and his followers died and thus lost their wealth. So, and what's the concern of Satadhanva? It's about the jewel, the wealth. And another explanation or wording that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur puts of Kritavarma expressing, having this exchange with Satadhanva, He says Kamsa and his company were already dead because of their enmity towards the Lord, and they were also rejected by Lakshmi. So notice again that just having ill feeling towards Krishna means that one's life is either going to be shortened in some way, or one is just losing all good fortune, because it's such a huge offense, particularly if there's no reflection and no remorse and no trying to actually clarify what's Krishna's position. Good fortune leaves one. And he adds, Krishna defeated Jarasandha in 17 battles. So there was somebody who had another king. So these are the slew of kings that were present at that time that Krishna had specifically appeared in order to kill or wipe off the face of the earth. Krishna defeated him 17 times. And of course, the incredible narration is that Jarasandha, in his enmity, he would go, and each time he was defeated by Krishna, he would go and collect more of his similarly minded kings, those who had ill feeling towards Krishna, and then go into battle again. And Krishna allowed it, releasing Jarasandha each time, so that Jarasandha would bring the new set of kings opposed to him. So in this way, he was able to wipe out a huge amount of them, with Jarasandha performing some service. So the response of Kritavarma to Satadhanva is putting an emphasis on the loss of good fortune and wealth, and death is approaching. These examples that were given by Kritavarma to Satadhanva, they illustrate two opposing positions. And there's one interesting part in the Srimad Bhagavatam where there's some sages talking to King Vena, and King Vena was particularly cruel, and they were particularly angry with him, but they decide to approach him. And this is what the sages say to King Vena: "We have come to give you good advice. Kindly hear us with great attention. By doing so, your duration of life and your opulence, strength, and reputation will increase." So you can see that's the following of religious principles. It's absolutely essential for the monarch to be following the direction of the Brahminical class. Those who live according to religious principles and who follow them by words, mind, and body, this is them talking to King Vena, and intelligence, are elevated to the heavenly kingdom, which is devoid of all miseries. Being thus rid of the material influence, they achieve unlimited happiness in life. So the sages point out to this particularly cruel king that if he's able to follow their advice, he's going to increase his life duration, he's going to increase his opulence, his strength, and also, if he's living according to religious principles, performing them with full focus of his mind, body, and intelligence, he's actually going to have an afterlife where he's elevated to the heavenly planets. So they call it unlimited happiness. So the heads of government have to set an example by following religious life. And religion, as Srila Prabhupada writes, means following the tenets of Bhagavad Gita, and particularly it's worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead and performing devotional service with body, words, mind, and good intelligence. It's absolutely essential because that's the connection, that's the relationship. So acting in this way, the king will rid himself of the contamination of the modes of material nature, and so too the public will become elevated. So such a huge responsibility the head of state has, because just his action, his following religious principles, elevates the whole of society. And Krishna puts it this way: One can understand me as I am, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, only by devotional service. And when one is in full consciousness of me by such devotion, he can enter into the kingdom of God. That's Bhagavad Gita 1855. So one has to be factually engaged in Krishna consciousness. And this is the duty of the heads of state, be it monarchical or not, but the head of state. It's to understand Krishna and gradually become free from the concept of material life and come to understand Krishna's transcendental qualities and his opulences. So the component of devotional service is that is really important and that can assist any head of state and anyone who is actually wanting to become free from suffering under being under the control of their own nature, is to hear about the Supreme Lord. And then automatically one comes to a stage of becoming free from these material concepts and becomes free from sort of very impure material thinking where there's greed and lust and desire for sense enjoyment. It just automatically starts fading and disappearing. And Srila Prabhupada makes a generalization. In that state of life, one can understand the Supreme Lord. So these are some thoughts that came from these particular 4 verses. If there's anything to contribute to the discussion or expand it, please feel free. There's a microphone there. And there doesn't have to be any shyness. It's very good to try and process because when you try and process and articulate something, it goes deeper. So you can just spend a minute or two and think a little bit.
One brief point. I just appreciate how Krishna's mercy shows up even in like moments of kind of opposition, what appears to be opposition with his enemies, like how the saintly persons, came and approached Satyajit and still tried to kind of give him a way out in the situation.
I didn't catch it.
I was saying I appreciate how Krishna's mercy shows up, how even like in that perceived like opposition with the saintly persons approaching Satyajit and still kind of trying to guide him as to how to stay within the religious principles and how to correct the situation.
Yes. Yes. It's of course there isn't much room in somebody who's already carrying ill will if not direct ill will, but at least doesn't give any importance to Krishna, to actually be able to hear something of the position of Krishna or his particular opulences. So there's not much mention of Satyajit, receiving any guidance from that, but rather just Krishna directly trying to instruct him. So indirect instruction coming from Krishna, no, refused. Kindly give this jewel to King Ugrasena, the king of the Yadus, and Satyajit, no, he's going to keep it. So he's going to get his 72 pounds of gold a day and the jewel's going to bring about complete or completely wipe out any mental or physical distress in himself and the entire population in the little area where he's ruling. So, and he didn't consider the position of Krishna, so he found it very easy to not even think about it. He made his choice and even forgot about it, didn't even think that there would be any reaction or after effects of his decision. So, yeah, he had no space for hearing anything about Krishna. He had directly opposed Krishna's will. That was sort of what you were thinking. Yeah, he directly opposed. Yeah, the person who at least got an indication that Krishna and Balaram were not persons to oppose was Satyadanva, the king who murdered Satyajit. He got, when he went to look for shelter, because he was fearful of Krishna, he knew about Krishna's power. But his mind was a bit confused because he was so greedy. A similar problem to Satyajit. And he was the one who received some advice from Kritavarma, who he viewed as a friend. And Kritavarma said, I would not oppose Krishna and Balaram, and why should I actually go along with you? And the reason, of course, he's not wishing to go any further, because he understands religious principles that, ultimately you want to perform everything for the pleasure of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he acknowledges that he had incited Satyadanva, but he's not willing to go any further. And why he'd incited Satyadanva, or confused his mind and therefore facilitated his murdering King Satyajit, was more out of feeling really angry about Krishna having been insulted and about rumors having been spread about Krishna by Satyajit. So, of course, you can look at that, is it the correct course of action to, incite the assassination of a king because of wrongdoing to Krishna? But these are very close devotees of Krishna, particularly Akura. There's a question there, but it's part of Krishna's pastimes, and a very close devotee is completely in accord with Krishna's will. So somehow one will take it that somehow this is how things were meant to play themselves out, because Akura is, at least we know of Akura, I don't know adequately about Kritavarma, but Akura is very intimately connected with Krishna. His whole meditation is on Krishna, so he would certainly have been attuned to doing things in a particular way, although, as His Holiness Ramapala Swami said the other day, he was involved in an assassination plot. So, it's a very puzzling thing in one sense, because it's against religious principles to kill someone. So, Krishna may do it because it elevates the person and frees them from suffering. But, so there is that. But yes, he was the recipient of some indication of the position of Krishna and Balaram.
Thank you for clarifying. And then one thing that I also kind of was making a connection on, and kind of guide me if it's not correct, but you were mentioning about like when the king does certain things that may be irreligious and how that minimizes his strength and his power, but also that affects the citizens and minimizes their ability to have that as well. And one connection I was thinking of was, at least back in the when Vedic society was prevalent, like the kings were the representatives of the Supreme Lord, in the sense that they upheld like those religious principles and duties. So would that be the reason why? And then also it reminded me of reading in the first canto right now, and when Krishna departed from the world. And that was something that Arjuna had mentioned was, Arjuna's strength and power that he had was no longer present anymore because he didn't have the presence of the Lord there. It was through Krishna's, presence that he was empowered to be able to even do, perform those pastimes that he had. So it just made me think about that connection of the presence of Dharma or the presence of the Supreme Lord and how that influences the king's ability to be able to actually lead his citizens, but also just that interconnected relationship between them.
Yes, that's the correct understanding. Yes, that particular connection between the head of state, taking the advice of the Brahminical class, and that this in fact puts them in touch with Dharma, or as you pointed out, which really means having an understanding of the soul in relation to the Supreme Soul. So that's an integral component for the well-being of the citizens. It's an integral component. Had you asked anything else in addition to that? I don't know if I missed something, but that was the main point, that it allows for that. That's a quick summary. Thank you for your comprehension of that. It's a very important point.
Hare Krishna. I'm not so scholarly or qualified, but I did appreciate the point being made of how the Brahmanas realized that they offended the Lord, and they reflected on that and tried to understand their actions and try to change them. So I really appreciate that, and I think it's I'm not a pure devotee, so the importance of reflecting on life before Krishna consciousness and actively changing our ways is important to make advancement. So I just appreciate that point, and thank you for your nice class.
Well, thank you. That's nice that you were able to relate to that in terms of the self-reflection being such an important component in actually moving forward in one's spiritual life. Yeah. The lack of self-reflection leads to getting stuck. And then one really is at the mercy of one's nature. So reflection at least allows one to give consideration, to look, to expand one's picture, to consider, oh, what could be the viewpoint that's been presented here? What is that viewpoint? Oh, let me relate it to my own nature. Oh, perhaps I can grow a little bit in this area. Let me try and take some little steps to make this more refined, or broaden my behavior. So yes, indeed, self-reflection is extremely important. And actually those brahmanas, there's a whole series of prayers that they give where they actually quite honestly begin to realize who Krishna is just by actually through their reflection. So it's quite amazing how a new world opens up through being able to reflect. Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you both of you for trying to process and think. It's a nice contribution to the class. It makes it complete. So thank you for your attention. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.